Their tractors have been bearing down on Europe's capitals. From Berlin to Bucharest, Warsaw to Brussels, farmers venting their fury, with margins squeezed by inflation and big distribution, which has been driving down market prices in the name of protecting consumers' pocketbooks. Here in France, the movement's gone from the impoverished small family farms of the Southwest to the gates of the capital. In a nation that's particularly proud of its peasant roots, whose agro-industry giants rank among the world leaders, we'll ask about the fury and the distress, and about the government's pledge to streamline red tape. And while the EU is forced to justify and possibly review new environmental norms that farmers say only open the door to less regulated competitors from around the world, the far right is making political hay out of what it portrays as woke globalist tree huggers out of touch with reality. All this is happening, of course, ahead of June's European elections. Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at farmers on the brink. With us from Poitiers in the center of France, British-born cattle and wheat farmer Anthony Thompson. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me.
We're joined as well from Brussels by Luc Vernet, Secretary General of the Farm Europe think tank. Welcome to the show.
Good evening. Hi.
And we welcome a Belgian member of the European Parliament. There he is, co-president of the Greens voting bloc, Philippe Lamberts. Thanks for joining us.
A pleasure.
Your reactions on the hashtag F24 debate, yet blocking the morning commute into Paris. French farmers this Thursday taking their grievances closer and closer to the capital ahead of plans by at least one union to blockade, it says, the city on Friday. Delano de Souza has more.
The morning rush hour commute outside the city of Rennes was different on Thursday. One after another, tractors joined in the traffic. Here, like outside other big cities in France, farmers are aiming to pile pressure on the government over rising costs and red tape.
Our aim is to block so that nothing can go in or out. This is the depth we've reached.
We ask for flexibility and recognition for our work. The second point is the prices. We are constantly being squeezed about prices. Costs have increased. Our prices have returned to the level of 3 years ago, and yet our costs have remained the same. The equation no longer works.
The anger on display amongst French farmers has been echoed across Europe in recent weeks. Farmer protests have also broken out in Poland, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Germany. Large imports from Ukraine have contributed to lower prices for European farmers after the EU scrapped quotas and import duties in the wake of Russia's invasion. It's a predicament that's got officials in Brussels taking notice.
We all sense that there is an increasing division and polarization when it comes to topics relevant and related to agriculture. And I'm deeply convinced that we can only overcome this polarization that we all sense by dialogue.
The French government finds itself in a tricky position as it's desperate to avoid a repeat of the Yellow Vest protest movement ahead of the Summer Olympics. France's newly installed Prime Minister has tasked his government to come up with aid measures. But French farmers say if the response isn't adequate, they'll descend on the capital and turn the country on its head.
Anthony Thompson, did you see this movement coming?
Oh, I think it's been brewing for perhaps the last 2 to 3 years. There's come a point where the amount of pressure that farmers face today, not just financial but administrative, is almost unbearable. There are people who are there to advise and to help, but at the end of the day, at this particular moment in time, the pressures that are facing the vast majority of farmers in France, especially livestock farmers, is just got unbearable. And I think.
And what is it? Is it inflation? Is it the big grocery chains squeezing you? What's it? Why?
I think it's a combination of everything. But when we have, as far as I'm concerned, there's 2 points. Number one, the increased volatility in what we have to pay for and what we are receiving. We cannot demand any prices whatsoever. We are takers, not makers. Unfortunately, when it comes to people selling to us, they are price makers. We are just price takers. So we're getting done both ways. What's going out of the gate and what's coming into the gate.
Hasn't that always been the case?
Not to this extent. I think with the rise in prices post-COVID and post-Ukraine, people have just got on the bandwagon. They've got on the gravy train, be it machinery manufacturers, be it people who supply fertilizer, who supply anything. Any excuse is there to be able to hike prices up. And unfortunately for us, we have long production cycles. We have to put fertilizer on crops in the spring. We have to actually put them in the soil in autumn and in spring, but we cannot harvest them until summer and autumn the following year. So by the time we put something in and harvest it the following year, we have no idea what price we're going to be selling things at. And we certainly don't have any idea as to what we're going to be putting in the tractor, be it in the fertilizer spreader or be it when it comes to the diesel and all the other things that we have to buy.
All right, we have a late arrival. I want to welcome her, Geneviève Savigny. You're just back from Brussels. You were in that meeting that we saw in that report with the European Commission President. Thanks for being with us. You're you're member of the European Small Farmers Confederation Via Campesina, and yourself a free-range chicken farmer in the south of France.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us. You just heard Anthony Thompson saying that it's the worst that he's ever experienced it. Has it been the same for you personally?
Well, maybe not for me personally and for some other people who have chosen to take another direction. But I think for a vast majority of farmers, this is the case because you have these constraints of the market. And I will say maybe more about it. But in the meantime, there is this request of society to change the way of farming, to be more sustainable, to be more respectful to the environment. And this we agree with basically. But I think the way it's been done and it's been developed over the past 4 years, I understand it's really impossible to follow for on the ground for farmers.
Yeah, the guidelines, the norms are hard to follow. I want to talk about that more, but just one final point about what we've seen here in France brewing this week. It's also been marred by tragedy. A farmer and his daughter, her daughter, run over by a car at a roadblock on Tuesday in the southwest in the Ariège department. The husband is still in hospital. Your thoughts on what happened there?
I don't know exactly what happened, but I think it is very, very sad and terrible to lose your life when you are fighting for your dignity and for income and with all your family with hope, and suddenly all the family is wrecked because of this terrible action. But I don't know more. I just have a lot of sympathy for this family and for all the people that are struggling for their income and survival.
Philippe Lamberts, same thing happening in Belgium where you are. We understand that farmers there are mobilizing.
Absolutely. I think it's a general phenomenon because everything that has been described by the first two speakers is a phenomenon that you see across Europe. The very fact, it's really incredible that you have here a profession that is vital to all livelihoods, that is both a price taker as a buyer and as a seller. I mean, that is indicative of a totally dysfunctional market organization. And to me, that is the number one problem. How is it so that indeed the buyers, that is the agro-food business, the retail chains, etc., can impose their prices on farmers? This, to me, requires action. And
so how better to protect the Anthony Thompsons of this world?
Well, first, I think that there should be action by the European Union on the competitive aspect, because here, clearly, we have cartels fixing prices from on the market. And it's been years. I remember, I'm a third-termer MEP in the European Parliament. In my first term already, I encouraged the Commission to go after the dysfunctional agri-food markets, and so far I see no action, neither on the agro-business side nor on the retail side. And obviously we have a problem there. Second, indeed, and I'm talking with farmers in Belgium as well, with all good intents, the legislation is often applied in a way that actually makes little sense scientifically. I mean, farmers know their business, basically. They know when to sow, when to harvest, when to put fertilizers, and apparently there are administrative delays in order to get subsidies from the Common Agricultural Policy that actually, well, the calendar that is imposed on farmers makes no biological sense or agrological sense, and therefore it gives me the impression of a profession that is on the one hand noble and that is getting to a point where it has 0 degrees of freedom. And that is unbearable. So, and I really appreciate the fact that none of the two farmers who spoke initially are basically blaming the Green Deal, because at the moment the Green Deal has been, well, I would say the agricultural sector has not been touched yet by the Green Deal. But indeed, if to all these constraints that are already present today, one adds, I would say in a blind way, additional constraints linked to the green transition that is needed, because pesticides indeed are pollutants, and indeed our soil is emitting too much carbon. But if we add all this without changing the basics of the system, then it's a dead end. It's really a dead end, and the transition won't happen. So I'm glad that the Commission engages into the dialogue now. We need much more dialogue, but actually the anger that I feel shows that this dialogue should have been started years ago, really years ago, and action should have been taken years ago on the market structure.
Luc Vernet, how do you explain the fact that regulation was rolled out before some of these issues, if we listen to the other 3 panelists, had been properly thought through?
Yes, thank you. I would very much agree with most of what I heard before. I would like to add, to respond to your questions, that this movement was already written in the because of the policy decisions that have been made. Because indeed, it was mentioned before the Green Deal, and the market decisions that should be made. But for the last decade, I would say that at EU level, we lost a bit the economic dimension of the Common Agricultural Policy. And in the meantime, we should also face the reality that income support from the EU went down steadily.
So let's just remind our viewers here, Luc, that the Common Agricultural Policy is basically the subsidy system for farmers across the continent. It's still the biggest line item in the European Union's budget.
And not only in the European Union budget, but also in the farmers' income. Today at EU level, it's more than 50% of farmers' income. On average, more for some farms and less for others. But it means that when you decide to freeze a budget for so many years, at the end of the day, it has an impact of half of the income of EU farmers. And this is also one of the explanation of the situation on the top of what was mentioned before. And I would like to add also one thing, is that not only the budget decreased, but also the capacity to get the money is more complicated because now farmers have to fulfill some requirement in order to get support, including in the eco scheme regime. So indeed, it's money, public money. So there is a need for explanation in front of that. But the administrative dimension and the constraints now to get this less amount of money is a reality that farmers are facing.
Let's take a look at that. Top 2 complaints heard by France 24's team, which was at a protest before dawn outside Paris this morning. First one, wages. One wheat farmer saying that in a normal year, he takes home 2,500 euros a month. These days, it's more like 1,000. So that gives you an idea. The other big gripe, well, and you just heard it there, is red tape, having to pore over paperwork after working the fields all day. Camille Knight has the story.
Due to heavy autumn rain, these fields are saturated. This farmer was meant to sow wheat in December, but was unable to.
The earth is like clay. If you plant cereal crops in these conditions, you know they won't grow.
Under EU regulations, he has to grow wheat this year. Last year it was maize, a crop rotation that preserves the soil. And since he won't be able to do so in time, he will have to explain why.
It's a document we have to fill out. Well, I have to state the land parcel number, its surface area, what I plan to grow and what I will be growing, and on top of that, geolocalized photos.
These steps are compulsory, or he could risk losing part of the €60,000 in European funding that he receives each year.
So the plot of land we just saw, it's the same one here.
He's been filling out his documents for 2 weeks. A tedious process, he says.
This isn't why I do the job. I do the job because I want to produce, and I live off selling what I produce.
There are also standards for other farmers. Here in northeastern France, Samuel Guenin raises lambs. He has to declare each treatment he administers on an application. Today, for instance, he's giving them vitamins. The monitoring is essential, but sometimes too complicated.
For every procedure, we need to state the number of the animal and which procedure was carried out. It's constant and time-consuming. We could be using the time to look after our animals.
Farmers need to respect the standards in order to receive funding. Every year, €9 billion of European funding is distributed to farmers across France.
Anthony Thompson, the French government has hit pause on rolling out a farm bill for a couple of weeks. It says that the intention is to try and streamline the red tape you heard those farmers complaining about. How easy is that to do?
Well, if we were to go on past experience, I'd say nigh on impossible, because every time the administration tries to simplify things, it ends up being more complicated than it was before. I just would like to make a very quick point about the cartels that the other gentleman was referring to. All the environmental norms that we have to respect, that's not an issue. Okay, the issue is that we import an enormous amount of produce that doesn't have to respect anywhere near the norms that we have to from many countries, and that is also a big factor in driving our prices down and keeping them down.
What's the answer to that?
Well, the answer to that is, I'm not a political person, but for me, the answer to that is that either there's some kind of duty that is, or tariff that is put on imports coming from certain countries that don't respect the same norms as we do, and then that goes to balance the manque à gagner that we have in our budgets yearly, or we just don't import and we have to produce locally. I mean, I know which one is the easier one to do, but nevertheless, there seems a lot of disparity between the things that we find the norms and the administrative obligations that we have to follow compared to the vast majority of other farmers worldwide, and we are in a global economy today.
Philippe Lambert, is that something that's being considered at the European Parliament?
Well,
import duties?
This is the result of a political choice made decades ago to go for a maximum of free trade agreements across the world by the European Union. And basically, to be honest, the agricultural sector has been seen by Europe as a bargaining chip. You mentioned earlier in this news hour the sale of Rafale jet fighters to India. Well, that's the basic idea. Europe, and I would say it was primarily driven by Germany, Europe wants to sell equipment goods, industrial goods in the rest of the world. And indeed, the rest of the world then wants to sell something to Europe. And oftentimes, indeed, the adjustment variable is the agricultural sector. This is one of the reasons why we Greens have been opposing most of these free trade deals, because indeed, they replace locally produced food by imported food that does not respect our ambitious norms. And indeed, again, this adds to the squeeze of our farmers. And we have to rethink that. But frankly speaking, I do not see a majority willing to reconsider that at the moment. But that's certainly part of the equation.
Geneviève Savigny, tell us about that meeting in Brussels that you attended. Was this brought up?
Well, it was interesting because it's an opportunity to put some topics on the table, and there seems to be some open minds around the table. So
they discussed things like perhaps import tariffs for countries that don't respect the same environmental norms?
In fact, it was more general than that. It was more setting the scene. It's going to be, as it goes on, it's going to be a dialogue which is confidential. So we would not be supposed to speak about the internal...
Who was in the room? Was it? Tell us who was in the room. What kind of players were there?
Well, it's the kind of player that represent farming, but in a general sense. So we have representative of farmers' organization, like COPA, COGECA, IFOAM, which represents organic farmers, but also rural youth, people representing environmental organizations, consumers, food banks.
What about agro-industry? What about...
Yes, of course. There was the representatives of trade, of retailers, processors. So, but not all of them, because when you have this kind of civil dialogue groups in Brussels, that is the ordinary setup for this kind of discussions on agricultural matters, then you have more people than that. So it was only 27 persons. And the idea is to try to kind of get away from this, what they call this polarization of the discussion, and try to go on with this Green Deal, with this greening of farming and of Europe. But if I may say, and it is something that we are supporting with Via Campesina in Europe, it is that, yes, we have to reconsider the market rules and these free trade agreements, but also all the agreement with the WTO and the World Trade Organization. We signed it in 94 or 5, and now we are in it. So we are in these rules of free trade and of open global market. And now we see the problems, because the compensation was subsidies. That was what farmers got. But then, to have subsidies, you need to comply with more and more and more conditions. And sometimes, as it's been said before, it is so ridiculous. You cannot comply. It's just you want to plant a hedge, but you have to do this size, not that one, so high. It's got nothing to do with the greening that I think the society is expecting. So we're on the wrong track somehow.
Luc Vernet, since COVID, we've talked about shorter supply chains, producing locally. Is it the end of the model for feeding Europe of old?
I really think that the European model of agriculture is at a crossroad, and some decisions need to be made if we really want to save the model that we have, which is a model of small size on average and diversified agriculture. And this is really something we need to preserve. And if we look at the long-term impact of the policy over the last 3 decades, for example, clearly we are on a trend that we force farmers to increase the size of their farm in order only to keep their income, not to say to have less income. So this is the situation today. So that's why from the strategic dialogue and the European election, we need to reconsider not only indeed the relation to the trade agreement, and the elephant in the room there is Mercosur, indeed, but also
with South America,
the downward trend of the CAP.
Right, the Common Agricultural Policy. But Anthony Thompson, when you think about the room that Geneviève Savigny was in, again, you were ruing the fact that it's a mismatch with distributors at this point in time, more and more so with wholesalers. How is it in their interest to change the system?
Well, I'm not sure it is in their interest. I think they're getting a damn good deal out of this. They can dictate the terms and conditions of any deals that they wish to make, and therefore, in a position of power, what interest do they have, financially or other, to make any kind of difference? If they don't get enough people producing chickens, milk, or yogurt, just go and get it from somewhere else. Get New Zealand lamb, get beef from South America, etc. You know, the whole system is definitely skewed. And I agree with the last gentleman who was saying that we do need to think differently. And also when we had the discussions with the WTO and the World Trade and everything in 1994, we're 20 years down the line. Things have changed. Everything, all the parameters have now changed. And in the Common Agricultural Policy, it's a 5-year cycle. The vast majority of farmers today have to invest over a 10 to 15-year period. So there's little visibility in what we are having to face and the factors that we are going to have to face financially and others with an investment plan that goes over 10 to 15 years. There are not many industries in the world that have to think that far ahead just for survival. I'm not talking about profit, I'm talking about survival. And there's another big problem in France that has been hanging over the vast majority of farmers' heads, and that is the installation of new arrivals into farming itself. Farming has a slightly negative image with the young people at the moment, but the ones who actually do take the step, who require a capital that is just insane today, the ones who do take the step are just faced with difficulty, faced with red tape, faced with just challenges in not enjoying what they actually wanted to get into, which is a lifestyle, a passion, and a business that they should be able to run.
Anthony, you left the UK to come farm in France. Do you think you'd have to leave again?
We might get onto that with Jordan Bardella, but for the minute now, I'm all right.
Okay.
I love France.
All right. You talk about Jordan Bardella, the head of the far right, and there's been, of course, politicians in this country who've been weighing in as the protests have grown bigger. French riot police will tell you that angry farmers have always been a force to be reckoned with. This week, they sprayed manure and set tires on fire outside the state superintendent, the préfecture's headquarters in the southwestern city of Agen. There were no arrests by France's usually very vocal law and order interior minister, and that seemed to bother a little bit one of the leaders of the Green Party.
You had the Dernière Rénovation climate protest block a highway for 15 minutes. They end up in custody and the court cases pile up. In this case, if environmentalists did 1,000th of what's going on today, they'd be in prison and sentenced.
Geneviève Savigny, your reaction to those words?
Well, I would rather say that demonstrators should not be arrested to start with, and the reaction of police is usually too strong.
So why is the Interior Minister going after environmentalists but not going after farmers?
I think it is power balance, really, and also because they understand that this anger is very strong and is very deep, and there is something to handle with care. So I guess they have this feeling, which I think is right, that there is a very deep problem and distress of people, and of course there is this, as I said, this kind of power balance. Indeed, it's.
Philippe Lamberts, do you think Yannick Jadot made a bit of a tactical error there with those remarks? Again, it seems to pit the environmentalists against the farmers.
Which I totally disagree with. I think we are allies. I mean, when you talk about farmers, agribusiness is something else. But farmers are basically people who know the environment best. And so we should be allies, and I think we are. And I agree with Geneviève. Actually, I would like to see the French police acting with tact, both with environmentalists demonstrating as with farmers demonstrating, frankly. We have seen too much of police violence. But what I think is just political calculus. When anger stems from people who are, say, on average voting left or green, then, of course, the French right-wing government steps in with violence. When it is coming from people who are supposed to vote right, then, of course, they are much more prudent because, they want to seduce them. And it's not by chance that we are seeing the European People's Party, Les Républicains in France, or the European far right, Jordan Bardella, the Rassemblement National in France, instrumentalizing the anger. And of course, for a politician, that's an easy thing to do. What I really appreciate when I listen to the farmers is that, well, they know best, and they how should I say, they are not giving in to these populist tropes. What we have been discussing for the last half hour are the facts of the matter, the real causes of the anger, and how to possibly solve them, rather than making this, well, basically making this anger an electoralist opportunity.
Yeah, and certainly those farmers have been courted, not just farmers, also fishermen. Last week, the government announced a ban on fishing along the Atlantic coast till February 20th. This to spare endangered dolphins and porpoises during breeding season. The estimated cost, though, runs to tens of millions of euros for the 450 small fishing boats in France that are impacted by all of this. The fishermen in the Brittany port of Lorient, well, they got the visit on Tuesday of the leader of the National Rally Party of Marine Le Pen, their head of a slate of candidates for the European elections, Jordan Bardella.
I refuse to let France become a subcontractor of globalization. I think we are a great agricultural power. I believe that our model of family, artisanal, local fishing has always been valued, defended and recognized, and I don't intend to let it die.
Luc Vernet, whether it's France, Germany, or elsewhere, would you say that the far right is capitalizing on these protests?
Indeed, we all see that they are trying to do so, but I think we should be clear. Farmers are the first Europeans. The agricultural policy is the most integrated policy across Europe. And if indeed we can critique what is done at EU level, and some of the policy should be put back on better tracks, that's clear. I think most of the farmers knows as well that the solution will come from the EU. Otherwise, we would put them all across Europe fighting each other on the same market. So I think this crisis shows that there are unbalance that needs to be fixed, but this needs to be fixed at EU level. With solidarity. And I think at EU level, solidarity is a key word that has been forgotten over the last years. And we see state aids developing and so on. So we need to discuss all together to find European solutions to European problems.
Yeah, Anthony Thompson, do you agree?
When it comes to making political gain out of these particular situations that we are confronted with, unless you're going to give solutions to the problem instead of just making very good observations as to what the state of play is, I can't see where you're going to take this. You need concrete solutions to a problem and a set of problems that are just being exacerbated more and more as we carry on. So making a little bit of political gain out of somebody else's distress doesn't sit comfortably with me, but I might well be in the minority.
What's it like when you talk about this with other farmers?
Well, it's quite sad because the vast majority of us just want to get on and be farming and making the decisions that are going to mean that we can produce a quality product for a market that is a buy at the price that we wish they could pay for, that would allow us to carry on doing what we love. The distractions that we have, the pressures that we have, lead to situations that are extremely stressful to the vast majority of us. With the last sort of 4 or 5 months where it hasn't stopped raining for a blimmin' day, you can't get any crops, and the ones that you did manage to get in, half of them are rotten. You're going through your stocks of feed that you've managed to get together in a year that had a little bit of a drought to it, because the climate has been a little bit unkind to us over the last 2-3 years. To have all of this come together and honestly, seeing people in the streets defending what we stand for, what the whole industry on the production side of things, at least, stands for, really does give us a little bit of hope that we're going to be heard, and that the solutions that are going to be proposed are going to be ones that actually help the farmers, and not just put a little coat of paint on massive cracks that are that we're facing as an industry.
Yeah, just talking about the optics, one final word on the politics of it. The optics heading towards those European elections in June. There was a Wednesday rally in Brussels. Turns out that rally was one that drew, by the way, far-right French politician Marion Maréchal, the niece of Marine Le Pen, was in fact organized by the right-wing populist Prime Minister of Hungary's main political advisor, Philippe Lamberts. Will the far-right come out winners of these protests when you look at things electorally?
Well, again, by what I heard today and what I hear in my dialogue with farmers, I think that it depends on us. And when I say us, democratic politicians, being able to listen, to understand, and to act. It is really about action. I totally agree with Anthony. We need to see action on the ground. And frankly speaking, there's stuff that can be done in terms of changing the market structure. It may not give immediate results, but I think that we can do something. Because to me, ultimately, it boils down to human dignity. I mean, I've heard, of course, that half of the income of farmers is subsidies. But who wants to live off subsidies? I mean, anyone who makes stuff, and in this case grows stuff, wants to get a decent price for his work and live off it. And indeed, I would like indeed subsidies to be an addition to a decent income for providing service to the society on top of producing food to all of us. And so indeed, if farmers on top are restoring the environment, are managing our landscapes, I want them to indeed be supported for that. But first, I want them to earn a decent living from selling their wares. That's to me the basic of a well-functioning market, and we don't have one in Europe at the moment.
Yeah, that brings us back to a point that was made earlier by Luc Vernet. We have a common market in Europe, but it's not always a unified market. Let's give an example. The French are eating more and more chicken, but it's imports that are meeting that demand. At the turn of the 21st century, just a quarter of French chicken was imports. Now it's 1 out of 2. Also, what we're finding is, and I'll turn to the chicken expert here, Geneviève Savigny, you look at that graph there, the same chicken you buy at the supermarket, much cheaper if it comes from Belgium.
Yes, but that's also the problem of the internal market. In fact, it's not unified because you have different social rules. You have different also regulation on pesticides you can use. So there is an internal competition, which is very, very destructive within Europe. And you have also, so this is also why a lot of people are against Europe, because they see they have more trouble than they have advantages from this, from opening the frontiers. So it is something that has to be really addressed seriously. And this is something I pushed during the debate, that we need to get out of this neoliberal doxa, that we are on, the market is global, and that we may not intervene. And this has to be changed. And we are all fighting for competitiveness. But at the end, you have all the farmers that they are quitting the job because of these rules. And
okay, but there's I'm sorry to talk about this, because it's kind of we're all a bit schizophrenic as consumers. We, on the one hand, want to support farmers and support sustainable farming. On the other hand, when we go to the supermarket, we don't want to spend too much money.
Well, sure, but good food and local food should be the easiest choice, and and also maybe cheaper. You see that in supermarkets, for instance, they make higher margins on organic products or on quality food. So you have different little possibility of actions.
How much is the onus on the consumer in your view?
The
onus. How much should the consumer be the one to bear the cost rather than the farmer?
I think it's all a balance, because we know also there is a lot of poverty in Europe, and it is growing also because of the policies that they are done. Because it's not only a loss of agricultural job, it's also loss of industrial jobs in many countries because of this competition all over the world. So there is something mad, because there is a race to the bottom, but it's not only France, it's Europe, and it's also other countries. And other farmers in other parts of the world are also facing the same problems with our products being imported in their countries, and they can't feed their local people. So this is why we are asking for food sovereignty, which is food democracy and the possibility to decide on what we eat based on local production without dumping other countries.
Is that mission impossible, Luc Vernet, at the European level? I'm not even talking about the rest of the world, just inside of the European Union, when you see how different farming is in, say, France and Spain?
No, not at all. It's feasible. We can do it. The thing is that we need to do it in an orderly manner, and having in mind the two components, economic and environmental performance. And today in the public policy, we forgot the economic dimension, including the market structure and also the need for farmers to produce food as entrepreneur. That's an important element. And then on the top of that, to manage transition and cope with climate change, volatility, with drought, floods, and so on. So we can do it. We need to do it as Europeans, because we need to go all in the same direction. But in the same time, it's clear that it's more and more difficult to build sustainable value chain globally. We had during this mandate imported deforestation text, which has as an ambition to stop the deforestation footprint in our product put on the market, but we see at the implementation stage how difficult it is, and there are resistance at this stage. So we have a bold statement political statement done by the co-legislator during this mandate, but we see that now when it comes to implement this regulation on deforestation, it is very, very difficult. So we need to be serious and to regulate import, but knowing that the power of the EU to impose its norm to the world is not the power we used to have a decade ago. So we need to be realistic.
Need to be realistic. We're running short on time. Philippe Lamberts, in 10 seconds here. When you look at the fact that they're in their fourth week of protests in Romania, when you've seen the protests in Germany, in Poland, in France, in your native Belgium, where's it going?
Well, good question. It will really depend on the reaction of the decision makers who are in place at the moment, not only after the election. And of course, we have to keep cool heads and really have the dialogue that was started today in Brussels delivering results. That's the only way forward, because indeed we need some how should I say, determination, but also there are no simple solutions. And of course, national populist parties would like you to believe that there are silver bullets, that you can find easy solutions to it. But this is a systemic problem. This is not just a point in time problem that is easy to solve. So it will really depend.
Anthony Thompson, because we're out of time, I just want to ask you, no silver bullet, you heard from Philippe Lamberts, but is there a low-hanging fruit, something that can be done today easily that could make your life easier?
I think the message that we would like to send out is that we don't want to be gardeners of the countryside. We want to be producers of food for the people. I think that will just sum it all up.
All right, and we'll leave it there. I want to thank you so much, Anthony Thompson, for joining us from Poitiers in the center of France, Luc Vernet and Philippe Lamberts in Brussels. Geneviève Savigny, thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.